Hello, everyone. Today, I'm here with Paul Elam, one of the authors for Chivalry. It is a gynocentric tradition. I read this book and I saw quite a few videos from friends of mine, Shaw and Matt Gillespie. They had been speaking on the matter, and I just figured I had to reach out to one of the gentlemen that put it together because there's a lot of things that are going on in our society that I think really need to be changed. And based on a lot of Paul's work, I just felt the need that I had to reach out to learn more. Paul, would you be so kind as to give us a brief introduction for people that may not be familiar with your work?
Well, sure. I'm Paul Elam. I'm a men's advocate. I've been doing this for nearly 20 years now actively. You can find me at paulelam.com. I founded avoiceformen.com, which became the most widely recognized platform for men's issues, still is. And now I'm running a group called XY Crew, where we gather on Zoom and in real world at different events with men all over the world to discuss the very kinds of issues we're going to come up right now in this conversation.
Awesome. So if you'd be so kind, can you go ahead and kind of lay the groundwork as far as the overall thesis of the work?
Sure. I mean, in a nutshell, the thesis is that for 199,000 of human beings, 200,000 year history, we had a form of pair bonding that was based on the interest of families, that was based on the interest of community, even based on the interest in serving God. But it was not based on romantic inclinations. As a matter of fact, throughout most of human history, if people decided to pair bond or to marry based on infatuation, which is, the strong force behind what we're talking about, it was considered a form of insanity. Nobody would have looked at that as a wise idea. Marriage was far too important to base it on a fleeting rush of neurochemicals. But what happened about 900 years ago, the daughter of William of Aquitaine, Eleanor of Aquitaine, commissioned troubadours to go out and spread through Arthurian legend and through poems and other forms of the media at the time throughout the medieval courts, this notion of romantic love, of taking the military ethic of chivalry, which that's what chivalry was a military ethic. And it was represented by a vassal kneeling before a lord, swearing fealty. In other words, the willingness to die to serve that lord in exchange for some lands and protection of other of the lord's resources. Well, it took that model and put it onto pair bonding. And this is how we ended up with men kneeling before women, bearing a gift, proposing marriage. Now, it spread out through the elites 900 years ago. It was very popular in the European courts. But about 200 years ago, it started being as the Industrial Revolution emerged and people began actually thinking about more freedom as the basis of life and doing what they wanted to do. That model just basically swept the West. And people began pair bonding on their feelings, not on the practicalities of life, not on the necessities for children, but sort of a love conquers all, which is very much the romantic ethic, that love is elevated, that feeling. And again, I remind people, we're not talking about actual love. We're talking about romance, infatuation. We're talking about a flood of oxytocin in the brain. That became the template for forming pair bonding. And all this time later, it does not appear to have worked out very well.
Sure. So you're talking about the difference between how nowadays we pair mostly on Eros love as opposed to something more like storge or agape.
Yes. The Greeks, I love the Greek definition of storge, which was of familial love. It was that you had pretty much the same love for your parents as you did for your wife, and the same love that you had for your children, a deep, abiding, committed, loyal love. But it wasn't this whining, dining, I want to make you feel like the most special princess in the world kind of love that we have now, and that women have come to expect from men, and that men have come to expect from themselves.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in my research to prepare for our talk, I went ahead and looked through the Bible, and in the Septuagint, I only found one instance of the word eros, and it was used in the book of Proverbs in the context of dealing with an adulteress.
Yes. Again, this was the notion of pair bonding on Eros. Not only considered insane, considered immoral.
Right. And it's interesting because it reminds me of a lot of the stories of old that were used to transmit the idea of chivalry. A good deal of them had to do with adultery.
Well, yes, by its nature, there have been people. C.S. Lewis has written about this. Joseph Campbell. There is erotic love, or eros, or romantic love, is adulterous by its nature. You look at Guinevere and Lancelot.
Mhm.
It was a betrayal. This is the core identity of this kind of love, is that it is elevated above all morality, even fealty to the king, even respect for marriage. It was absolutely an adulterous love.
Sure. And it makes sense when you go ahead and look at it from their perspective of this kind of love is something that causes people to go crazy. And it was something to be extremely cautious of rather than something to be embraced and sought out.
Yes, I think one way you might look at this, instead of being inspirational, Solomon was a cautionary tale.
Mhm.
After all, look what happened. He sacrificed his obedience to God. He worshiped other gods. He did all this, all behind this instant lust for women. And it took him down.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in Solomon's case that it wasn't that it was the multiple wives. It wasn't until he started marrying foreign women and getting along with their like religious practices and all of that that things went downhill.
Absolutely. And again, I look at the Bible from Adam and Eve to Solomon to David to Samson, one tale after another of men falling to women over this kind of love.
Sure. I mean, we see that recorded all over the place. I think that that's one of the big things with David and Bathsheba too, is that's what he was looking for and he got it. And he lost his firstborn son with her as a result of it.
Yes, it brought him down. And I think it's also important to note that we've blended this into the state now. The state has become a functionary arm of romantic love. When marriage became about feelings, then now, if a woman doesn't feel the same way, then the marriage has failed. And the courts literally recognize this and go in to dissolve the marriage, alienate the father from the children, destroy his assets, often rob him of freedom, all as an extension of the mother's wrath.
It seems that this is kind of like the idea of mixing this eros and modern marriage to come up with no fault divorce, because it's contingent on how the woman feels or how the man feels if he's filing. But we know that most divorces are filed by women. So typically speaking, it's whether she still has feelings for him or not. And that seems like a far cry from traditional marriage.
And again, yes, when I hear modern so-called traditional men, traditional conservative men talk about traditional marriage, my first thought is which tradition?
Right.
Is it the tradition of all of human history, or the last couple of hundred years with this new kid on the block in a model that's literally failing us?
Right. The difference between romantic marriage and economic marriage is just huge in how you put them together. Before, you had families that were working together for their common good and for the good of their progeny. And each of the children, after they got married, they recognized that they had a filial duty and filial responsibility to their parents upstream, just as they have responsibility to their children downstream. So it made for a very different environment.
Yeah, the reason that we've always called it matrimony, we never called it patrimony. And that's an important point, because matrimony literally signified the time in a woman's life where she set aside being a child and came with actual responsibilities to a family that were sacred, that were inviolable. But now, since we've switched to a model that really throws that out the window, if she doesn't feel good about the marriage after a year or two or 7 years, then the marriage has failed, and it's time to dissolve it and move on to greener pastures. Whatever happens to the kid happens to the children. It's a highly dysfunctional model. And we're just now starting to figure that out. Now, marriages stayed together pretty well until about the last 60, 70 years, because there was still social pressure to keep them from getting married. I was in a discussion recently and pointing out how we used to whisper the word divorce. People literally did that. It was something to be said very quietly because it was an offensive topic. People weren't supposed to get divorced. But once feminism came along, or another branch of gynocentrism, and removed the barriers by creating no-fault divorce, overnight we saw it skyrocket, predominantly women filing to go pursue more personally fulfilling lives, not in the interest of the family or their children, but what was good for them. And that's what the romantic model taught them, that what was good for the woman was what was important, because in the equation of somebody kneeling and somebody standing receiving gifts, the woman is important.
Right. She's the one that's being lifted up in the equation. And it's interesting that as women are walking away from tradition, all the expectations of tradition are still on the shoulders of men for the most part.
Absolutely. And men, to their discredit, in my opinion, have accepted that deal. Now, we are seeing a lot more men walk away from the institution itself because it is not a healthy one. And they're beginning to recognize that you've got a 50-50 shot of being destroyed in family court a few years down the road. And guys are saying, no, thanks. And of course, now we have a society full of women saying, where have all the good men went? Well, they went in the direction of their own security and safety.
Right. When you go ahead and provide a deal that is not good for both sides of the equation, why would you expect somebody to go ahead and sign up on that dotted line for it?
And they're not doing it in increasing numbers. I think personally the institution is doomed. It is getting less and less popular. A lot of women don't want to get married, and now a lot of men are following suit and saying they're not going to do it either. And our best response socially so far has been podcasters trying to shame men into going back, and saying you owe it to society. This is what it takes to create civilization. Just put your neck on the chopping block. Don't ask questions. And if you're lucky, maybe it'll work out. And if it doesn't, it was your fault anyway, because as you've just pointed out, the onus is on the man. If it fails, it's his fault.
So I think that's interesting, because I think that the vast majority of traditional conservatives, when they listen to the word chivalry, it evokes in them very different ideas than I would say that you and I share on the matter. And would you be so kind as to kind of draw the causal links between chivalry and gynocentrism and feminism?
That is a good one. And I think there is a triad there that is connected. I don't know if we found all the language we need to, and done all the research we need to articulate it all succinctly. But basically, chivalry was a long-lasting code about loyalty. That's what it was about. And when you basic social engineering, which is what Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter Marie of Champagne did socially engineered people to take that ethos and to place it over the pair bond. This was, I mean, it's impossible to underestimate how powerful that was long term. It became very popular with elites, and that part right there for me was the birth of modern gynocentrism, or cultural gynocentrism as we know it. A lot of people in the red pill community will tell you this is something biogenetic, that it's wired into us. The evidence says that's completely not true. It's a fantasy that sort of, I think, gives men an excuse to say, well, there's nothing I can do. This is just the way women are. And so they either surrender to it or walk away. But that ethos, that military ethos being planted onto pair bonding relationships in humans, I think that moment was the genesis of cultural gynocentrism. It became serving a woman, protecting a woman at all costs, even a woman you don't know. We have guys now that get themselves killed protecting strangers, men with children, men with wives and families that depend on them, get themselves killed protecting women in public from criminals, with no idea whatsoever of the character of the person they're trying to save. Just that instant knee jerk, I've got to lay my life on the line for this woman. That is not sensible. That may sound cold. It may sound indifferent to other people's plight. But personally, if I've got 3 dependent children at home, I've got an obligation to protect them. That's my job. It's not to protect some random stranger on a subway. But lo and behold, this is the standard we're given, and men who don't step up. I mean, how many little clips have you seen on social media about how these awful men didn't stand up and defend that woman? They did nothing, and they're shamed and ridiculed for it. That's how powerful cultural gynocentrism is. We keep men in line with shame. And I know a lot of people will say, no, a real man does this, a real man does that. That's the romantic ethic. It also translated into our notions of what a real man is. A real man values his life very little, and even values his children little if it would come at the expense of not being able to defend a stranger. I don't know if that came out all right, but I think
I understand what you're getting at. I get the gist of it. So that's an interesting thing. So in the Bible, I'd say that the scripture goes ahead and provides certain responsibilities of men. And I think that for the vast majority of it, they are in connection with a specific relationship or a covenantal bond of some sort. So we have relationships, say, in marriage, I have a responsibility to my wife to go ahead and do certain things. I have a responsibility to my children to do certain things. As an employer, I have responsibilities to my employees to do certain things. As a son to my mother, and so on and so forth. There is no universalized command that overrides that hierarchy of priority in terms of who the protection should go to. Whereas I would think that, or based on what we see in society, there seems to be a sense that men should unilaterally and universally sacrifice themselves for all women.
And that is, to me, quite literally insane. That's a standard. That's a suicidal standard for men to be willing to treat their lives as so disposable, and to treat their roles for their children and their wives and their parents and their employees or anybody else that depends on them is something they can throw away on a knee-jerk reaction to play hero. It doesn't wash for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you bring up the idea of social enforcement and the idea of a real man would. I find that anytime somebody starts with a sentence with a real man would, they're either a tradcon or a feminist of some sort that are looking to go ahead and get men back on a plantation of following the whims of women, generally speaking. Not so much, hey, what is good for society? What is good for establishing and maintaining order? But what is good for women?
Never trust anyone who puts an adjective in front of the word man. They are trying to define and control you. If I can, and this is the part of the shaming control that men experience in their lives. If I can define masculinity for you, then I can control you. All I got to do is point to whatever you're doing and say, that's not manly. And your knee jerk in this culture will be to, oh, well, I better rethink that. Because the worst thing you can do in the romantic model is be seen as unmasculine.
At least by their standards, right?
Yes, by their standards. And I say be seen that way for a reason. It is all a matter of social perception and what men are supposed to do. We've fallen over men who run around taking care of women, being obsequious to them, the sort of sappy public fawning we give every time a woman can tie her shoes without help from a man. We sit and clap and say, oh my, what a great accomplishment, because we're infantilizing them with this model. That's what the romantic model does. It turns them into babies who are, and then when you have an immature individual who runs their lives on what makes me feel good right here and now, do you think that might run into a problem for a covenant like marriage that's supposed to be enduring, and it's supposed to make it through times where your feelings change, through hardship, through cancer, through all kinds of things that bond is supposed to maintain, but it won't survive. I don't like the way I feel right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because in the book, there's laid out in the early chapters that there are key players and how to recognize the echoes of the past in today. Can you go ahead and go through a couple of the key players that we see on the stage enforcing these things?
I got to be honest with you. I wrote 2 or 3 essays that were included in the book. The rest of this work was Peter Wright. I give a big shout out to him right now.
Okay.
But in terms of details of some of the stuff that he's written, I'm probably not going to comment intelligently about it.
Okay, that's fair enough. So like Jason's story and the Portland incident are the 2 essays that you had written on the matter. So we can go ahead and get into that then. So can you go ahead and kind of lay out the details about Jason's story first?
Sure. Jason Cisneros was a 19-year-old man, lived about 5 miles from me at the time in Houston. And he was visiting a girlfriend or a friend who was a girl. And there was a car in front of him outside this apartment complex where a woman was screaming. A man was apparently smacking her around. And he instinctively, or I don't think instinctively, I think through cultural conditioning, his knee jerk was to run over there and rescue this woman. And he got shot and killed for it, taking him from his family forever and his future forever. And the part of the problem with that scenario for me is that, all right, this guy that killed him was apparently a drug dealer, a gangster type, real rough guy. And he was also the man that woman chose to be with. This wasn't, some random woman that he attacked on the street out of the blue or anything like that. They were a pair bonded couple that he was intervening in. And that relationship was based on the choices of both of them. Our romantic programming, our chivalrous, romantic chivalry is what I call it, as opposed to regular chivalry. That programming tells us that none of that matters, that we are to disregard all of that. This woman, for all we knew, was another drug dealer with him. I mean, that often happens. She might have been selling, and I'm not speculating for sure here, but for all we know, she was selling crack in the schoolyard. And he ran in to intervene in a relationship that she chose, and it got him killed. And the internet lit up with people saying, what a hero. I think we need to start talking about what a fool. And What a terrible decision to put your life at risk in this scenario. And this gets repeated. These guys have become literally, Warren Farrell documented in one of his books that they become their own crime statistic. Men who try to intervene and end up getting themselves killed. For what? It is just a question that doesn't get answered, because if you even ask the question, what was the point of this death? What did it help? What did it solve? People will get furious at you.
Well, it just goes to show how deeply ingrained the social programming is. This just kind of reminds me of the Titanic and a more recent sinking of a large ship. So there was a sinking of a large ship that had a relatively low casualty rate compared to the Titanic. And stories afterwards weren't like, hey, this is great that the casualty rate went down compared to other major accidents of similar nature. They were bemoaning the fact that there were still a huge amount of guys that retained their lives after such a harrowing tale. And then you go back and you look at the Titanic, and if you look at the evidence, the lifeboat still had half capacity that was open. And so many men lost their lives needlessly for the sake of a romantic story. And then we have the nerve to go on and make a feature film and document the adultery of a specific story on the Titanic and yield that up as some great romantic story when we know the results of what happened.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things about that movie that I think are very telling and very much drawn from this model. The iconic scene of Jack and Rose at the front of the boat with the arms out extending, this promise of freedom, that this is what the romantic model gave largely women at men's expense, this sense that their lives were all about them, about whatever they wanted, that there was nothing impossible. And then we have to note at the end of the movie, told in romantic fashion, Rose is reflecting back years, not on her children, not on the marriage that she created, not on her lived life and her accomplishments, but on a guy she had sex with on a boat for a couple of days back before. And that was her great reflection of her life. And that's romantic. And we see that, and the audience goes, oh yeah, isn't that just wonderful? That's how brainwashed I think society is about this stuff.
Sure. And it just goes to show how true the idea of the alpha widow is, right? Is she went ahead and remembered decades and decades back to this specific instance and remembered it and dumped off not a symbol that he gave her, but a symbol that her husband had given her that was very valuable economically speaking. And she was still pining for Jack, even though Jack could have had his life saved had he gotten on the lifeboats.
Yes, it is a horror story that warms the heart of people everywhere.
And so another story that this brings to mind is back in not Tristan and Isolde, Lancelot and Guinevere. So when Lancelot is going to the tournament to defend Guinevere's honor about the adulterous relationship that they were accused of, Guinevere has the nerve to tell Lancelot to throw the fight.
Yes, she sends him secret instructions to fail. So
he's put in a very humble circumstance, and everybody's making fun of him because he is able to beat this guy if it was a one-on-one even match, but he was told to throw it.
Yes. And just like, I mean, and so much of this, I think, gets reinterpreted through the romantic model, away even from some of the original intent. I think Shakespeare's a good example. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare was mocking the stupidity of young death, of how they commit suicide in the end over love. And he was pointing to how stupid this was. But now, since everybody's looking at everything through this sacrificial lamb of men sort of romantic mess that we've got going on today, that this is an endearing, wonderful story of true love and the importance of it. They died out of sheer stupidity, but it's still and now considered one of the greatest love stories ever told.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Shakespeare has such a good look at this, because if you take a look at Romeo and Juliet and then compare that against the Taming of the Shrew, I think that is a wonderful way of comparing and contrasting the two, because in the Taming of the Shrew, the husband in that case had to train somebody that nobody wanted, and she became the better wife out of everyone because he held a patriarchal order for her.
Yes, exactly.
Now we talked about Jason's story and some of the things that kind of blend in with that. Something that's completely different, that wasn't based on physical threat, but based on reputational threat alone, was this idea in the Portland incident. Can you go ahead and expound upon that a little bit?
Yeah, well, it's basically the same scenario. Some crazy guys acting out on a train. Someone goes to rescue and dies, just based on instant reaction. I think that we have so many people trying to put forth the narrative that this is instinctive. It is not. Compassion is instinctive. We are wired for compassion as a species. We're wired to protect in many ways. We are not wired to jump off the edge of the Grand Canyon in order to respond to an instant situation in which we are not threatened. This is the cultural programming, and we're unfortunately really good at it.
Yeah, what's interesting about this story is the women's lives were not in danger. Their honor was the only thing that was at stake. He was insulting their honor, and then these guys go ahead and show up to try to defend Milady's honor and end up dead. And I see this played out time and time again on X, where somebody will go ahead and say some ridiculous feminist nonsense. Somebody stands up to it, and then all the white knights come into the comments section defending Milady's honor. It is insane how quickly that happens.
I've gotten death threats over the years.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
for making comments that people believed offended women. This is, I mean, think about that. You're willing to make death threats because you perceive a woman that you don't even know and never met was offended by a guy you don't know or even met, but that the command to make sure women don't experience discomfort or they're not held to accountability, this is what this gets into. It's not just that the women are being disrespected or that female ways are being questioned. It is that you can say nothing at all to hold a woman accountable for anything. That's part of the romantic ethos. That woman standing over a guy that's kneeling, bearing jewels, is not to be questioned in any way. It's why we have these tradcon clowns out here saying, happy wife, happy life.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Which is basically a not so thinly veiled threat. What that is saying is that if she's not happy, you're going to suffer. There is retribution coming depending on how she feels at the moment. So you better make sure she feels good, because unhappy wife means your life is going to be unhappy. What kind of contract is that for a pair bond?
And it's an untenable standard. You can't control somebody else's feelings is really the truth of the matter. Like happy wife, happy life is such a nonsense agreement for anybody to step into, because you don't have levers of control over any piece of that arrangement.
And you shouldn't. Adult human beings are responsible for their own happiness. That's a fact we'll never get away from, but the romantic ethic takes us straight into, no, if she's not happy, you're supposed to suffer. And it's how you guys get guys introducing their wives as their better half and the commander in chief. and all these ingratiating, obsequious ways to elevate her above him. And the really interesting part is in my counseling practice, I get a lot of guys who have done this. They've lived on their knees for years, and lo and behold, she ends up not respecting him. Can't figure how that happened. And then he's like, well, this is awful. I hate this, because there is a point of no returns on this. You get saturated with this kind of role for a relationship. And then one day a guy wakes up and he says, I can't do this anymore. This is terrible, but he's trapped. If he gets a divorce, he's going to lose all of his assets. He's going to lose access to his children. So then he really feels trapped. How do I deal with this? And there's not a lot you can tell them, because they are actually trapped. I mean, what I tell them is eat your losses and move on with your life. Is probably the best solution. I mean, if your kids are a year or two away from being of age, then you might stick it out. But if you're at home with a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, you've got to decide at that point, are you going to live under this tyranny for the next 10 or 15 years before your kids get out of the house? Or are you going to own your choices, which is, I mean, let's face it, men make the choice. They see the deal on the knee with the jewels. The woman is important. She's elevated. She's what matters. I will have nothing until she's happy. That's a choice they're making.
I think that's interesting. There's something interesting there. Yeah. Because James Sexton, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but one of the things that he says very clearly is that most people that sign up for marriage have no idea what they're actually agreeing to. There's so many hidden parts to the marriage contract that nobody is actually aware of, and they're not going to go look at their family code for their state and see what their rights and responsibilities are when they sign that dotted line.
Nope. And well, it's in the same way. They're also blinded to character flaws in the women they pair bond with. What we tend to do is, when infatuated, when we have that flood of oxytocin in the brain, we're cautious about anything that might threaten that because it feels so good. So they look at character flaws. They will witness vindictive behavior in these women, and will tell you, yeah, man, I don't want to make her mad, because then there's heck to pay for that. They agree to that deal, and they're blind to anything. It's not just the law. They're blind to who she is. They're blind to even what love is. Again, I go back to the thing. People get married nowadays thinking they're in love when they're in chemical infatuation. Love is something that comes after a durable relationship, after you solve problems together and go through all kinds of things in life. You eventually come to a true love. I'm 24 years into my marriage, and I actually know something about what love is. And it was nothing like what we had in the first year. Absolutely nothing to do with it. That first year is just chemicals, and it makes men blind to everything. Try to talk to a guy who's infatuated, and say you see and most men have seen this in their lives. They see a couple, they know the guy, they see things in the women that just don't look good, right? Try telling him about that and see what happens.
That's really interesting, because I think that calls back to something that's sorely missing in today's culture, is that a lot of guys don't have close friends that they trust and respect and care about. Like, I think that it's essential for men to have a brotherhood, like a shield wall, where they go ahead and cover each other and watch out for each other's interests. And I think that relatively few men have that in our society.
Oh, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, society shames men for doing it. There'll be implications of homosexual interest. What are you, gay? I've seen that a million times. Men are encouraged to compete with each other for women's approval, not to coalesce with each other for their own interest. And when men do, I mean, that's essentially what I promote, is men coming together in their own interest in life and looking at their own value, their own needs, their own desires and ambitions in life, and trying to achieve those. And I'm attacked all the time for what I do. this society wants men at each other's throats in a competition to serve women, and the rampant consumerism that women bring to the culture. And they're shamed anytime they try to bond with each other in a way that's supportive and healthy and wholesome. There is multiple forces, but I think romantic chivalry is behind all of it. I think there is a unifying theory here that explains all this stuff.
Yeah, I think this is also a class-based thing, because I think that in the upper class and the aristocracy, you see a lot of guys with good, solid friendships because they're usually the ones that are overseeing this. Whereas this kind of friendship among equals is most often shamed in the lower classes because they don't want them getting together and writing and reading rule books for each other so that they can have positive impact on their lives and the lives of their brothers.
Agreed. And again, maybe not in a direct sense, but the romantic template drives that too. It gives you all the rationale you need. If there's anything that can be looked at in men's behavior, especially in lower echelons of men, and be criticized as unmasculine, they'll do it.
Right. And
they don't
it's interesting.
want men connected.
Sure. And it's interesting because these systems are systems used to keep men on the plantation serving women so that they can have their control over men. So whether it's through chivalry, whether it's through very specific ways of interpreting the Bible or religion, these things have been used for millennia to control men. This isn't a new thing. It's just another iteration of it.
Men have been shamed into battle for ages. I mean, one of our more recent examples that stands out in history are the Pankhurst sisters in the UK, World War I, handing out white feathers to otherwise able-bodied looking men on the street if they weren't in the meat grinder in continental Europe getting slaughtered. And it worked. It was basically saying, you're not a man. You're a coward. You're supposed to go die. And they sent women to hand these feathers out for a very specific reason, because that would be ultimately a shaming moment for men that would drive them into the battle. We promise medals and heroic recognition for men who sacrifice themselves in battle. And look, I'm former military. I respect the guys that do their job in the military. I love them. I'm behind them all the way. But I think we have to acknowledge that we've set up this whole warrior ethos that's completely compatible with the romantic ethos, that if you're brave, that if you take bullets, if you are willing to die for your cause, that rewards you as a man. We build monuments to these guys. We give them medals. We try to take care of them after their bodies have been laid waste. But we hail them as heroes, which elevates them in the eyes of women. And that becomes the carrot that we dangle in order to get men to fight. And sometimes, and again, I respect the troops more than I can tell you, but many times they've been sent to die for our corporate interest, not for countries, not for preserving democracy, but for oil money and things like that. And we still sell them this ethos that this makes you a masculine, wonderful man, and therefore more selectable by women if you do this thing. And so we corrupt it.
Yeah. So I'm retired Air Force myself, and I think that we definitely need to be more selective about how we allocate our blood and treasure and human resources, and that we need to be really careful with men's lives. This doesn't make sense for us to just throw things about for the various winds of change. And I think that it's interesting that we do all of these things like give medals and build statues to elevate their perspective in the eyes of women. And we don't really consider what really went into paying that bill in the first place.
Because ultimately it doesn't matter. I mean, one of the things that this model of a man on his knees is a model of a sacrificial servant. This is his role. And sacrificial servants are disposable. They are replaced with other sacrificial servants. So the whole ethos gives this. I mean, sometimes it comes up in the manosphere, red pill community, whatever you want to call it, the issue of male disposability. That's where that comes from, is the notion that your burdens don't matter as much as taking care of the woman, period. If you've got to die, you've got to die. And to me, there's some degree of that I agree with. I would lay down in traffic for my wife if it would save her. That's not a question. But it's been transplanted onto society as a whole. That's how we get Jason Cisneros and the guys on the train in Portland, is that your life really ultimately does not matter. And to serve the ethos, the lives of your family don't matter that much. What matters is serving the ethos. And we've lost ourselves in this.
Sure. Now that we've talked about this and the Jasons and the Portland story and things of that nature, what are things that we can do as men to work through it? Like, what's the prescription to move forward from your perspective?
Moving forward, I can only paint a pessimistic picture.
Sure.
I don't think we get realistic change in this without some sort of social collapse and the emergence of a new order. I think that gynocentrism is too deeply embedded in the modern Western psyche. It's too permanent, too fixed right now. What we can do, I think, is what we're doing right now. We can discuss this, and I think there's maybe 3 to 5% of men overall that can hear it. I think 95% of men, I don't care if they're feminist, if they're tradcon, if they call themselves whatever, almost all men are locked into this ethos and they're not getting out of it. They can't imagine. They're afraid of loneliness. They're afraid of sexual rejection. They're afraid of the pain of being different or being shamed. And that's just going to be a permanent block for them. But there is a small percentage of men, and there's a lot of people in the world. 3 to 5% is a lot of men. I think we can reach those guys so that they can individually reassess their lives and what they think is valuable and say, hey, wait a minute, why was I so quick to buy all this? I get emails from guys like that all the time. They said that I was going in one direction, I found your work, and wow, I'm totally rethinking my life. I mean, it's one of the most rewarding things that I get out of my work is those emails. Those guys are salvageable. We can save those lives in many ways. We can reach guys. But the idea that we're going to have a men's rights parade in Washington, D.C. with ticker tape and thousands of people on the street cheering it on, not going to happen. I just don't think it's possible until there is some kind of new order based on real hardship. Because suddenly, when you have real hardship, then you're going to notice what men actually do.
And it's interesting, when there's real hardship, a lot of times women just fall in line when there's actual danger in the world. And I think that we've done a great job of taming the many dangers of the world and have left women in relative comfort. And it is only in the relative comfort that they have the ability to have feminism in the first place.
They hide in the infrastructure that men provide and train themselves not to see it. It's almost like all this transportation, these modern buildings, cancer treatment, everything that you see around you was built by the civilization fairy. And it just magically appears. It's not men out there sweating and toiling and breaking knuckles and getting cut and losing their lives doing this kind of work. It just sort of happens. And that's where you get an entire class of women that say, I can do anything a man can do. And sometimes there are some women who can. I mean, I think it's a very small percentage. I don't want to take that away from them, though. But on average, Camille Paglia said it best. If civilization were up to women, we'd still be living in grass huts. And that is the truth. But women have deluded themselves into believing otherwise. They sit in air-conditioned offices on the 30th floor of a high-rise commercial building with a beautiful $2,000 chair and computer equipment and everything they need, and Starbucks right by them, and a nice little pastry. And they think women did this just as much as men. No, I'm sorry. That's just not the way. And that's why we had a patriarchal order for so long. Why there was an order of authority between God and man and women, because it actually works.
Well, I think it's interesting how women go ahead and talk about all of this stuff that happens in life as if it just magically came out of nowhere. But in a lot of ways, it came out of guys just wanting to procreate and have kids and sleep with them. It's like, oh, it's a lot more comfortable to be in a house with air conditioning than it is to be out in the forest somewhere.
And look at how men did it too. Men made homes a lot safer and easier for women before they made building homes safer for men. I mean, you've seen pictures from the 30s of men walking with no harness, building skyscrapers in New York just on I-beams up in the sky. And those guys fell regularly. I mean, that was part of that deal, but it didn't occur to them, even at that time, maybe a harness here would be a good idea. No, you got to build, you got to man up and do it. It is, we have worked hard to make life easy for women. And I think that is also, unfortunately, become part of how we've infantilized them.
Well, it's interesting because the idea of the men forsaking their own safety in establishing safety for women is just another way of looking at the male disposability element to this. Is they were willing to be disposable because nobody took the time to look at the system as it was and say, hey, are we doing our best to mitigate risk in this? And that's something now society we look at, but I think that for the longest time that wasn't much of a concern.
There were sort of glimpses of a different way of looking at it throughout history. For instance, the Romans were hugely successful in a military way. And one of the ways they got there was that they figured out that in battle, the way it was prior to that time, men would go into battle with each other, hacking each other up with swords and hatchets and all manner of stuff, and they would go into the battlefield until they either won or died. The Romans figured out that if you rotated men in and off the field, that you won more battles. If you actually took an investment, okay, after 30 minutes of this kind of battle, a guy's exhausted, take him off of the field, replace him with a fresh guy, let him get food and water and rest, and then send him back in. Their ratio of winning battles went up exponentially when they actually started taking care of men. So even at that time, there was some knowledge that men were resources that needed to be protected. But I think we've more or less lost sight of that.
I think it's interesting because in a lot of ways, like crop rotation is also something that uses that same general premise, is that if you go ahead and let the soil regain its ability to be fertile, you end up with better crop yields. And I mean, even this idea of instituting rest, this is something we saw even as far back as the Old Testament, where the Sabbath wasn't for God. Sabbath was for man, because he worked 6 days out of the week and put his blood and sweat and toil into things. And so he had one day that was set aside for the purpose of rest.
What you just said reminds me too, that I think of a point that I think needs to be made about marriage. There are, I think, 5 weddings in the Bible. None of them involved a state functionary, and none of them involved clergy, as far as we know. The church itself has adopted the romantic model. C.S. Lewis wrote about this quite a bit. The church has more or less replaced Christian love with romantic love, that whole model. And the church ultimately took a knee to the state, said, okay, we'll let you license. We won't do weddings without the state's permission. When, as far as we know from scripture, a marriage is a covenant between the man, the woman, and God. It doesn't involve the church, doesn't involve clergy, doesn't involve the state. Um, I think that's the direction we need to start looking at for marriage, is to get the state out of it. And as long as the church is being corrupted with the romantic ethos, to keep the church out of it too. I can't tell you how many times I've counseled men who were in marriages they thought were working, and then at some point there's a little friction. The wife goes into the congregation, sheds a couple of tears, and they all turn on him.
Yeah, that's crazy. Have you ever read David Edgington's work at all?
Yes, I have. I've interviewed David. Good man.
Okay. Yeah, I interviewed him about a month ago, and his most recent book, White Knights and Reviling Wives, goes through a lot of that dynamic that's just so pernicious, and it's all over the place. And yet you try to talk to a tradcon about it, and they're just like, no, I don't see any of that. That's not happening anywhere.
And look at why they're doing that too. I can tell you, I had an experience at a local church where we had attended service and were chatting with a group of couples afterwards, maybe 4 couples, and somebody referred to my partner as my better half. And I said, look, she's a great woman. I love her to death, but she's not my better half. And the looks from the women were scowls, instant. I knew that was a church I could never go back to. It was instant hatred. And the look on the men was fear. Like, oh, shut up, Paul.
Yeah. What's really interesting is, so I had a similar experience, except a congregant had spoken to my wife and had used similar language about how she's the boss and things like that. And she's like, nope, I'm not the boss. He is. And she looked incredulously at her. She's like, what do you mean? And she's like, no, he's the boss. He takes care of everything. He takes care of me. He takes care of the children. I am his. That's what it is. And I was really proud of her for saying it.
Actually read scripture and believed it.
Yeah. And so it's just one of those things where it's so foreign to so many people in the modern lifestyle that nobody sees patriarchy for what it is. So many people are trying to go ahead and call patriarchy some oppression or some kind of like abuse, but it's just father rule.
Patriarchy always benefited women. Patriarchy is a burden that I believe God has put on the backs of men to maintain that order. But let's make no mistake, the primary beneficiaries are women and children. You can't. It's just amazing to me that you can say patriarchy oppresses women. By the way, that first seat in the lifeboat is mine because I'm a woman. That's patriarchy.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how a lot of times guys in the red pill space, I think you've made this critique a lot of times, where they will improve themselves. They'll do all the things for the sake of the woman. Whereas I think that you're much better off as a man doing those things to improve yourself for your own sake, for your purposes and your purpose for your service of God. Right. And I think that a lot of things that come alongside with it, like women and family and money, come as a secondary matter while you are serving in your primary duty.
Absolutely right. I think one of the biggest flaws in the manosphere, as we know it right now, is that the prescriptive stuff that comes out of the red pill space, the manosphere, ultimately is about chasing women. All of it. Just lift, bro. Get bigger muscles. Become a high-value man. All this is in the pursuit of appealing to and attracting women. It's not in the actual self-interest of the guys doing it. I think men should act in the interest of their families. I think that's a much better model. But what we have instead is happy wife, happy life, which is less like saying, I don't care if my children are happy. What I care about is I want my wife to be happy and to approve of me. And the people in the manosphere take that woman pursuing ethic, that romantic ethic, and then apply it to relationships. That your job is to make sure that she's maintains attraction, and they get into manipulative techniques, a dread game, all this other stuff, trying to trigger abandonment issues in women so they won't leave. How insecure is that? How other-centered is that?
Do you think that a part of that is sell the men what they want, but give them what they need? And like, don't get me wrong, some of the more manipulative things that you talked about, I'm not like really endorsing any of that. But what I'm talking about is the idea of, if the guys that are on the other side of the screen really are feeling lonely because they don't have a woman, do you think that there's some merit in telling them to pursue these good things if you can just give them a reorientation in terms of the purpose as to why they are doing those things, with the intended consequence of they end up being more attractive to women? What do you think of that as a perspective?
Well, I think it's a good point. I think that these things of like pursuing better jobs and self-improvement and getting healthier, those are worthwhile goals. Absolutely. And I think that they do bring benefits. But I've often, as a matter of fact, just recently in another discussion like this, I've heard it framed as, well, the guys do it, it improves their lives, they get better, and a byproduct of that is that they tend to attract a better class of woman. And I don't fault that totally, but I also know that if you take away the byproduct, they won't do it.
Right, because they're not oriented for their own benefit as the primary purpose, right? Or their family's benefit. They're oriented around the secondary thing, and as opposed to having their own interests or their family's interests being the primary thing to be pursuing.
Right. If you won't do it because of the absence of a byproduct, then it's not a byproduct.
It becomes your primary goal at that point, because
it's your primary
in its
goal.
absence, you don't do it. Yeah.
Right. And these guys, they develop themselves, they learn to attract women. They've learned nothing about the romantic ethos. They've learned nothing about their actual own self-worth or anything like that. And then they end up in family courts, or with false accusations, or with paternity fraud, or with any other number of things that come from guys that have a single-minded pursuit of women to the exclusion of all other values.
Right.
So I just, while I understand, I think it's important, some of this information is really good, I don't buy the idea that this is really an appropriate route to a man improving his life. I think guys need to get good with being alone. They need to figure out that when they're alone, they're in good company. Once they get that part of life down, where then they can take and leave women based on their values, their character, other characteristics. But as long as they're running from this deficit, this sort of deprivation state with women that most men operate in, they're going to remain blind to all the possible consequences and to the absolute unfairness of the romantic arrangement.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money right there. Now, I want to be very respectful of your time. We're right about 2:40 your time. Do you have a couple more minutes to address some questions?
Sure.
Okay, so we've got one. How is a man doing work to be more attractive to a woman a bad thing? I think we hit on it a little bit, but do you think you can go ahead and put a little cap on it?
I don't think it's a bad thing for a man to work on himself. But I think if my motivation is I'm going to work on myself so I can spend the rest of my life serving a woman, with her as the authority figure in the relationship, good luck with that. I mean, again, I'm not saying that being physically fit or taking care of yourself is bad. I try to do it as good as I can myself. But I think maybe that question sort of misses the point. You don't need unhealthy motivators to do healthy things.
Right.
I'd rather be motivated otherwise.
Sure. And so another question. One is the spiritual head, but the husband and wife are life partners. Well, I don't like when we talk about partners, generally speaking, when we're referring to marriage. But, is this talk spiritual, biblical, or political and worldly? I think it's all four at the same time. What do you think?
Well, First, I'll say, and I've heard this many places, and I get the logic behind it. I don't have a problem with the term partner. It's totally okay to me. I bring assets into my marriage. So does my wife. We connect those things and make them work out for our benefit into the future. In partnering in that way doesn't bother me. There is still a hierarchy here. So maybe it's a bit of a misnomer, but I'm comfortable enough with the word. I think spiritual, biblical, political, worldly, all the above. I think it is. This touches on all areas of our lives.
Yeah, totally agree. As far as partnership, I go ahead and look at it as more of a limited liability partnership where you have a general partner and then a limited partner, where the general partner is still going ahead and executing.
I'll take that one. I'll take that one.
Right. I think that a lot of people aren't too familiar with like business structures. So I don't go ahead and like put that out there, but you're a learned guy. You probably know the difference between a lot of these things. So now I've got a few things linked down in the description. I've got your X, I've got your YouTube, as well as your Substack. And then you had mentioned earlier about your men's group, the XY Crew. Is there anything else that you'd like to go ahead and put forth to the audience?
Oh, just to encourage them, if you haven't visited my channel, please go there and watch 10 of the videos. And I think you'll get a good grip of what I'm trying to do here. This is about, for me, men rethinking who they are. We've been sold a bill of goods about what it means to be a man. We've been sold a bill of goods about what a marriage is, about what pair bonding is. So much of the stuff that we operate on is a stack of lies and mythology that's been created in our recent history. I encourage you to go in and take a look. One of the videos that I recommend is Chasing the Dragon. That lays down some of the fundamentals, but go in there and check it out. And hopefully, if you're not familiar with this space or with this kind of work, it may add another dimension to your thinking that'll be helpful to you.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and follow up the Chasing the Dragon video. You have a follow-up after that called Slaying the Dragon, where you go ahead and talk about the prescriptive side of it after you've described, kind of what you're getting at there.
Yes, and that'll be linked. The Slaying the Dragon is linked in the description area to Chasing the Dragon.
Awesome. And then we got one last question from Mountain Man Tops. Why do you think being more attractive means that you are subservient to a woman? I don't think that that's what we're getting at. I think it's just a matter of whether that's your focus, right? I think that there's a lot of utility in being attractive, generally speaking, and I think you would agree with that. But I think it's a matter of how you frame it, right?
Yeah, I don't think because you're more attractive that means you're subservient. Never said anything like that. Honestly, I think there is a kind of defensiveness around this ethic in most men that causes, with all respect to the gentleman asking the question, not trying to be disrespectful here, but that sort of a 2 + 2 = 5 conclusion about what I said, and I do believe that comes with trying to defend this sort of, I'm going to spend my life around the focus of pursuing and pleasing and being more attractive to women.
Sure. So I think to button it up, it's okay to do good things for yourself, so long as you're not focused like in a crazy way for the benefit of other people that don't have a covenantal relationship with you, right? If you don't have a good relationship where there is a two-way street going on, why would you go ahead and center that as your primary purpose?
Absolutely. And I would point out that if you're going to focus on yourself, you first have to know what the self is. And the guy on his knees doesn't know his self. He just doesn't. He wouldn't be on his knees if he knew himself. And this is something men are trained to do, that we're so other-centered. We're brought up, take care of women, protect women, provide for women, do this, do that. How many young boys get the message, what about you?
Right. Yeah, and we have to be able to teach our sons something.
Yes. And so I'll stand on what I've said. I don't think that guy knows himself. I don't think the romantic ethic has room for men with their own interest and own needs in life. I just don't think it's all about that bended knee and that jewel and that sort of pledge of fealty to serve a woman as a vassal would serve its lord. That is not, I wouldn't call that a guy with high self-worth. That just doesn't make sense to me. And I think ultimately you will, if you want a byproduct, the guy who knows himself, the guy who won't get on his knees, going to attract more women every time.
That's true. I think so. I think that's really what the case is. Now, Paul, I really want to go ahead and thank you for taking the time to have the conversation. And I don't know if you got a couple minutes after we go ahead and turn the cameras off for a little bit of a conversation. Is that okay for like 2 to 3 minutes?
It's been a pleasure. Hi to your audience. Hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we're going to go ahead and wrap up the stream now.